Settle down, brother. This is the Quarter Report powered by ENC.com. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. We have a special episode for you today. Last week, I gave the keynote address at a Media Freedom Festival held in Johannesburg by Media Monitoring Africa, now known as Moxie Africa. And in that address, I spoke about what I feel are the biggest threats to South African media, South African journalism, and just the truth. A fact-based reality with information that we can rely on. I spoke about all of the different big threats to South Africa in the context of our media being more important than ever as we fight for the truth to come out and for facts to be understood as reality. And I spoke about fundamental changes that I feel like need to happen now, or at least very soon in South African media, to protect this country from the dangers of disinformation, misinformation, nonsense propaganda, and just, the hollowing out of fact-based reality. So enjoy my address. As always, let us know what you think of all of this on the WhatsApp line. It's fundamentally a story and a set of issues that are about me, about us, about we do, but also about all South Africans, because it's about how we understand and get to know what South Africa really is, what's really going on, and what South Africans really feel. You can let us know on the WhatsApp line what you think. Number is 0607 613 436. Enjoy. I was invited here to talk about the future of media, the battle for truth, the fight for information and transparency and facts. And I truly never thought that one day I and you would be living in the biggest superhero, supervillain franchise of all time. Because we are truly living in the MCU right now, people. The Mkwanazi cinematic universe. It's been an absolutely wild time since General Mkwanazi said what he said on the 6th of July for journalists, radio reporters, TV producers, script writers, me and my whiteboard mind map going deranged on ENCA that has been watched by so many millions of people. And it's been a wild year for me too. Our late night TV show, The Dan Quarter Show on ENCA, got renewed for another year. Our podcast, The Quarter Report, was licensed by ENCA, which is the first time ever in South African history that a major news broadcaster has licensed a podcast. I had a little spat with Piers Morgan. Settle down, brother. I was booked to do Helen Zille's roast and then mysteriously vetoed. I think she wanted a soft lineup because she was going to try and come to Joburg. You know what I mean? And the leader of one of South Africa's major political parties in a closed-door meeting with his exec said that he would do everything within his power to get my TV show cancelled. Seems he didn't have that much power. I'll let you guys guess who I'm talking about. But it's a really, really pivotal moment in South African history. What I've been reflecting on is I'm going to talk to you now about my vision for where South African media is going and what needs to happen to safeguard South African media is that we are blessed to live in one of the most extraordinary countries in the world as far as media freedom goes. In many countries around the world, journalists are being killed, people are being harassed and targeted. Even in America, it's very, very, very dangerous to be a content creator. I'm so glad the Americans are suddenly noticing what we've been seeing the whole time about them. But whistleblowers are being murdered, people are being harassed, and then there's also this terrible and severe fight over the truth, over facts. Something that has happened in the last year. South Africa is the most internet-addicted country on earth. That's been found. The average South African spends 6.5 hours a day online, which I call rookie numbers. But we spend so much time online, and that is where social media, although I don't think it's social anymore, I don't think a lot of people are socializing anymore. It's content media, is being manipulated to portray South Africa in a way that is afactual and non-representative. A very, very easy example that I think about all the time is that Twitter, or the dark place formerly known as Twitter, we in this country have a very bad relationship with it because it is the place where the vast majority of people go to find out what is happening in South Africa, but so few South Africans use it. Like it's the 5th or 6th most used by a mile. And then there's also a problem happening at the moment with South African news media where budgets are being cut, journalists are being overworked, they're being paid very little and expected to turn out very much to get the numbers, to get the clicks, to justify advertising revenue, to justify the continuing existence of their companies. And the best way to put out an article that will instantly do well with very little work, and I'm not dragging this, it's necessity for survival because of the modern funding models, is to go onto Twitter, find out what's trending, then to go to your news editor and say, this is trending, people are talking about it. If I write the article about it, people will read the article, right? The problem is, it takes 3,000 tweets to trend on South African Twitter. 3,000. That is nobody
in a country of 66 million people. A further problem is the fact that most of the accounts on Twitter that regularly post, not most, half of them, around 45 to 50% of the posters that regularly post, there's no sign of human life in those profiles. It's a generic picture. You don't see any sign of human life. It could be a bot. It could be somebody operating many accounts, pushing an agenda, right? That's a fundamental problem. Because then, something that happens on Twitter, a place which very few people go to, becomes a news article written, becomes a TV news story reported on, is then presented by establishment media to the country as something everyone's talking about, even though maybe 3,000 people were and half of them are not human beings. And then the whole country goes, wow, everyone cares about that. A great example is the fact that a survey came out recently showing that a significant proportion of South Africans believe that there are 15 to 20 million illegal migrants or undocumented migrants in this country right now. Now, if you stop for just, can I swear, William? For just a fucking second, if you just stop and you think what that means, are 1 in 3 of the people you meet not South African? Obviously not. Obviously not. Whether or not they're documented or you're in Cape Town and meeting another German and wishing somebody could speak Zulu is besides the point. Like, the point is that many South Africans have been so fundamentally misled by a Twitter hashtag that became an agenda, that became a xenophobic dog whistle, that actually made us less able to engage with the problem of a crisis healthcare service that is not providing, which in certain northern parts of South Africa is used by a lot of migrant people as well as locals. And now we have Operation Dudula getting one-on-one meetings with Aaron Motsoaledi, the health minister. They got 1,000 votes in the last election and continually break the law without consequence, right? But you can see how the manipulation of our conception of the real, our conception of what South Africa is fraying. And then on the other hand, we have an equal crisis. I'm sorry I started with so many jokes. I gaslit you guys. I sold you down the river. I catfished you guys. But we have an equal problem. We have an equal problem that the South African government, amidst many funding cuts, fundamentally undermines Stats SA. So we only get the best statisticians in the country working to find out the truth about South Africa once every 10 years, which is too little. And then in the last round of surveying, COVID stopped people answering their doors, private security stopped people answering their doors. And so Stats SA had to come out and say, our data is actually not that accurate or reliable, but that's the only data we'll have for the next 10 years. And now Johannesburg is getting budget cuts on data that is not accurate about the number of people who live here. So we have a fundamental crisis of truth and factual accuracy and research and reporting from the one group that we need. Because justice comes from information. Understanding comes from information. Say what you want about the TRC, but we found out, right? And before we found out, when tens to hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper were being burnt, such that you could see the plumes of smoke coming out of government apartheid offices in the early 1990s, burning records, we didn't know what had happened. And what I'm terrified by is that at the moment, many South Africans just don't know ourselves. We don't know South Africa well enough. And so when I think about, and I'm going to talk about a few other things, you're going to have to stop me at some point. I'm not good at keeping to time, but you can stop me at any time. The fundamental first problem that we have is that we don't know what is going on, and then we have bad actors trying to undermine what is going on and mislead us on purpose, the miseducation of South Africa, shout out Lauryn Hill, to satisfy political agendas, criminal agendas, but also business agendas. The private sector is as complicit as government in the continuing entrenching of inequality, disempowering of workers, lack of creation of employment opportunities, the rapid financialization of most of our money such that people are making vast profits and we're supposed to feel bad that the Woolworths CEO only got a 40 million bonus this year instead of a 60 million. Shut the fuck up, man, honestly. But like the rapid financialization is causing growing wealth inequality when actually these big businesses could be making big profits, not as big as financialization profits, but big profits if they only built some factories and created some affordable products, provided, like we talk about the healthcare service, the government has failed in a way that we can never forgive. Life is Esidimeni, we can never forgive. But at the same time, if Adam Smith's free market really worked, don't you think a private business would have created accessible, affordable, high-quality healthcare models for all the South Africans who can't afford public? They would have. And so the private sector is also complicit. And also the private sector is deeply interested in you not finding out the level of corruption that they also have, because it becomes a fine, because it becomes a payoff, and because the South African populace, because we're not financiers, can't really understand fully, and shouldn't be expected to, what evil and what corruption and crime was done. So that's where I see our like multi-headed hydra of crises coming from. But now let me talk about what is happening in South African media and the reason why I'm here, because I'm not a journalist. As I said, I came up with new ways to celebrate Father's Day for 10 years. Like, that was my come up, but I was also obsessed with the news and I was obsessed with history. Trust me, by the 10th Father's Day, you're like, Jesus, guys, some of them are good, some of them are bad. Can we not do this again, please? But like, so I started going online because I was watching The Daily Show. I was watching the American way of combining entertainment with a way of storytelling. And it's not more important than hardcore news journalism. It shouldn't replace it. But I was like, there's something missing here. We can put in some humor, we can put in some personality and some humanism into the way that we talk about the country. And the reason why I'm here is because people responded to that. Now there's a TV show and a podcast and this, like me being here and whatever. But what's particularly happened in the last year, particularly with Mkonazi, is more and more news content creators. So there are those anonymous accounts on X that will rip news media's reporting and sell it as their own and twist it. There will be people like me who do podcasts where I'm not a journalist and I'm relying on the phenomenal work of phenomenal journalists. And I infamously once was described as a threat in a PowerPoint presentation at one of the biggest news media houses in the country. And on the one hand, I understood why they described me as a threat, because I reported on a story that they had broken, giving them full credit, using a screen grab from their work, so everyone who saw my work saw it was their article. But they saw it as a threat because ultimately people weren't going back to read the article. But my response to that, respectfully, was that 2.5 million people saw that story. And I just don't believe there's any evidence that 2.5 million people would have read that article. And I'm not criticizing journalists, I'm not criticizing writers, traditional journalistic writers. But what that speaks to is the fact that as technologies evolve over time, the ways of telling the stories of South Africa and the world change. So the critique from journalists towards people like me, which again I understand, is the better you do off of our work, the less money we get out of it, and it affects our funding models and the rest. But that was true when talk radio stations came along. It's the same. We are broadcasters. It was true when TV news networks came along. And we need to talk about an ecosystem that constantly helps each other, right? Because ultimately, more people are finding out what's going on in South Africa through the way that I'm telling the news. But I cannot understand South Africa as a person, nor talk about South Africa in a coherent, commentariat kind of way without the iconic, incredible journalists whose work we all benefit from. So one part of my vision for the future of South Africa is that content creators have to be hired by newsrooms. I know that you're already shaking in your boots thinking about funding another person. But the point is that there are very talented radio broadcasters who are now paid and they do an incredible job talking about South Africa. There are very talented and phenomenal TV broadcasters who do the same thing. And now in the digital age where South Africans are addicted and they're online all the time, there are people like me who do that too. But those people, ultimately, we would love it if more people like us were in those newsrooms, because we would much rather that people like us were sitting in your newsroom with you, learning what you've learned, and then telling your story the best way possible, getting traffic to the newsroom rather than my YouTube channel, and creating more funding, advertising, revenue opportunities, and value in that organization, for that organization, than us individually, right? That fundamentally has to happen because writing is really important, but ultimately people are watching video now. And so the move has to be stop seeing us as threats, work with us, right? Hire us, like put us as a part of your stable so that we can re-empower the news media organizations for the age that we're currently living in. One of the reasons why my podcast is licensed by ENCA is that they recognize that I get 10 million views a month on TikTok and 2 million views a month, 1.5 million views a month at this point on my YouTube channel. And if we put ENCA on there, it's good for ENCA, right? That's a good move, but it's only the start. So for my vision of the future of South Africa, it should be about getting very talented digital storytellers to be working with journalists in those newsrooms to the benefit of the project of journalism. And this isn't even a radical and interesting thought. The Washington Post has a team of 10 content creators who are not journalists, but man, they make an incredible video. And people are watching Washington Post stuff who don't live in America, don't care for the Washington Post or know about it, because they've got a team of content creators who are very good at the storytelling, working with the journalists who are very good at the hardcore frontline research and the writing. We don't want a world where the journalists who are phenomenal beat reporters going to find out, expose people, calling people, writing books, to have to also then beat their face and figure out how to do a good edit for TikTok. That destroys the work that they do best. It takes away from their time and attention. That is bad. And some of the hollowing out of our modern news journalism, I think that's the problem. Is like journalists now feel a pressure to become personal brands. It's not what needs to happen. What needs to happen is journalists need to be left to be phenomenal at what they do, and then paired with storytellers who are phenomenal in those newsrooms at getting the most people to care about and understand the truth and the factual accuracy and the value of that journalism. The second thing that we need to do is that we need to train South Africa to expect good journalistic standards from news creators. So something that pisses me off to absolute no end is people who've become famous, particularly in the last year, off of the Mzansi cinematic universe. They go on YouTube or Twitter and they talk about a news story, basically just reading the story. They don't give credit to the journalist. They don't give credit to the news media organization. And then the next day, they follow the American modern principle of spreading conspiracy theories about the same journalists, saying that they're paid for, they're bought off, they have agendas. Karen Morn is the reason why you know anything about anything, bro. You still use her work over and over again when it suits your narrative, but when you can get a bunch of clicks spreading a conspiracy theory about someone, then suddenly you're drawing lines and doing dots. We need to somehow train South Africa to expect more from all of its content creators, such that the audience has the discernment to say, that's bullshit. You were all evidence heavy just now when you were reading somebody's article in their work, and now you're peddling an evidence-free conspiracy theory about them 3 days later because it's going to get clicks. Genuinely fuck you. Genuinely fuck you. So we need to train the audience to have a higher expectation of that. The next thing that I think that really needs to happen is we need to have an expressed valuing on fact checkers. Shout out Africa Check if they're not here tonight. I saw you guys last night. Make some noise for Africa Check, people, because fuck me. So much about journalism now is about fact checking and saying that's not true, that's nonsense, you all believe that, AI is getting stronger, wada. That's so important. It's literally fighting the propaganda, the misinformation, and the disinformation. We need to make sure there is funding for people dedicated to the thankless task of watching video after video and seeing thing after thing trend that shouldn't trend, because it's a lie. And that's what I don't like about the word misinformation. That's what I like about the word disinformation, because disinformation is intentioned. It's a lie. We need to get back to saying not that somebody said something false, but that they lied. We need to return the moral damnation, the moral judgment on people who lie about the state of the world. Because unfortunately, when people lie about the state of the world, people get hurt. You know already about South African mothers who didn't get the intervention that they needed while pregnant at clinics because of Operation Dudula, justified by lies, right? That needs to be reinstated. The public broadcaster, the SABC, who I worked at, which I worked at for 10 years, performs a crucial, non-negotiable function where in South Africa, most private business people do not see the potential in African language news media. There are very few titles, very little funding. Think about your biggest news media organizations. What languages are they writing in? English and Afrikaans. The vast majority of South Africans don't speak English or Afrikaans as a mother tongue. You always want the news in your mother tongue. All the data supports that. Trust, understanding, access. In a context where private commercial interests do not value nor see Zulu, Xhosa, Sesotho, Setswana markets, you need a public broadcaster to be giving the news in a reliable way to those markets. You need their radio stations, you need their TV stations. The SABC is corrupted and full of malevolent actors for many reasons, and all of that should be stopped and fixed. But what I've always believed is, I don't know if you know this, the SABC has a dual funding model. So it's partially state-funded and partially ad revenue funded. But the SABC has to do what is called commercially non-viable content, like I just described. Advertisers, big businesses who want to advertise, run by English and Afrikaans-speaking people, also don't see the value in advertising on Ukhozi FM to 8.5 million people, one of the biggest radio stations by audience in the world. And so you need a public broadcaster to be doing that service. But if a public broadcaster also has to sell ads, what about when they need to do things that advertisers are not going to spend on? You get a funding crisis, and you get the incentive within the public broadcaster to not do their South Africa building mandate, their truth-seeking, truth-fighting mandate. We need to do away with the expectation or the funding model in the SABC that requires advertising. Do away with it. And before you think that's radical, that is the BBC's model. That is literally the BBC's model. And that is why the BBC can do, except on Gaza, good work. Except on Gaza, good work. Because they're not worried about paying bills and attracting advertisers. They're worried about following the story and innovating in a smart way for modern media. And the last thing that we really need more of, and this is why I'm so happy to be at MMA's organization of this event, is that unfortunately, it will always be true that a lot of good work and journalism is about the drudge. You've got to watch Shadrach Sabir dribble himself for 8 hours. You've got to watch, yeah, that man can dig a hole, hey? That man should have been a miner. Like, that man is better at digging holes than defending himself. But you've got to have someone watch the 12 hours of the chicanery and the nonsense to find the key things. You've got to have people fighting in Parliament and in court to have the government provide information that the Access to Information Acts and laws require them to provide so we can find out what is going wrong. Because often, what journalists will tell you, once they get the information from the government, it's very obvious what's gone wrong. And then there's court cases because there's paper trails. Shout out Cyril Ramaphosa's ex-nephew. So, like, once you get the information, then you can get somewhere. But you need advocates, you need lawyers, you need people going through the drudge and the pain of requesting information and seeking that out and forcing the government to tell us what they are doing. So those are the 4 broad things that I want to leave you with. The first one is, in this modern age, we need talented, video-first, online-first creators in newsrooms. Not as threats to newsrooms, but to make newsrooms modern-day competitive, because the newsrooms have the best and the most important stories. But if they're not telling them that compellingly, or at least not as compellingly as the endless competition of your TikTok algorithm, they're not going to cut through. The second thing that we need is we need to change the expectation amongst audiences in South Africa. Part of media literacy is saying, did they show you an article that you can reference? Did they show you a link you could go to? Where did they get this? And why are they now peddling conspiracy theories about people who are the same people whose work they thought was good enough to be the truth literally the day before in their video the day before? The third thing that, and by the way, we also need to have an expectation of people on Twitter that you seek a human identity within an account before you believe that account. You seek evidence of an actual person. The third thing that we need to do is we need to somehow get the public broadcaster, we need to get the politicians to do away with the bullshit of advertising revenue funding model. And by the way, the vast majority of the corruption in the ANC, Freudian slip, the vast majority of the corruption in the SABC will go away once you remove that advertising funding model, because that's a lot of where the rot is in the South African Broadcasting Corporation, is the funding model because of the advertising expectation. And the fourth thing that we need to do is we need to double down on fact checkers and people doing the drudge work of fighting for access to information to make sure that South Africa can find out. So, it's great that we live in a country with incredible media freedom, but we are now fighting forces who have the power of the internet and anonymous Twitter bots and anonymous accounts to peddle bullshit. And we need to do at least all of these 4 things, amongst other things, if we're going to have any chance. What is great is that we have phenomenal, world-class, iconic journalists in this country. Jeff Wicks's book is basically what the SIU told us about Tembisa, almost word for word, 2 weeks ago. And what's also great is that we've got phenomenal, talented storytellers who are good at the internet. We have everything that we need. So let's do it.